The cameras were rolling. The audience was settled into the comfortable rhythm of a heartwarming late-night segment. Barbara Chen sat in the guest chair with the quiet elegance of someone still learning how to be alone. Her silver hair caught the studio lights like moonlight on water. But in the next 10 minutes, everything would change. David Letterman would notice a detail so small it could have been missed entirely. And that observation would unravel a story so devastating, so heartbreakingly human, that it would silence 300 people and remind a nation that loneliness can be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. It was Tuesday evening, March 12, 2024. Inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, the familiar warmth of studio lighting created an intimacy that made even the largest problems feel manageable. The audience had come expecting the usual mix of comedy and conversation, but they were about to witness something far more profound. Barbara looked exactly like central casting would order for beloved grandmother. 71 years old with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a navy blue dress that was both modest and dignified. Around her neck, hanging from a delicate gold chain, was a wedding ring. Not on her finger where it had lived for 48 years, but close to her heart where it now needed to be. 8 months earlier, her husband Robert had lost his battle with pancreatic cancer. She was there to discuss the West Side Widows Support Group, a community organization she'd joined after Robert's death. It was exactly the kind of segment David appreciated. Real people doing meaningful work, helping others through their own pain, finding purpose in the aftermath of loss. The booking had come through the show's community liaison, who'd been moved by Barbara's articulate passion for helping other recently widowed women navigate the impossible landscape of grief and practical challenges that followed the death of a spouse. "So tell us about the West Side Widows," David said, settling into his chair with the comfortable authority of someone who'd conducted thousands of these conversations. "How did you find them? And what do they do?" Barbara's voice carried the careful cadence of someone who'd learned to speak about grief without breaking down in public. "Well, David, after Robert passed away, I felt like I was drowning. We'd been married for 48 years. I didn't know how to be Barbara without being half of Barbara and Robert." The audience murmured with sympathetic understanding. David nodded encouragingly. "A neighbor told me about the group," Barbara continued. "It's about 12 women, all of us learning how to live again. We meet twice a week, Tuesdays for practical things, Thursdays just to talk. Sometimes we cry together. Sometimes we laugh about the ridiculous things our husbands used to do." David chuckled, and so did the audience. It was exactly the kind of universal experience that connected people across all boundaries of age, race, and circumstance. "That sounds like exactly what you needed," David said. "Community, understanding, people who get it." "It really has been," Barbara said, and for the first time since she'd sat down, she smiled with genuine warmth. "These women understand things that other people can't, like how you can miss someone so much that you still set 2 plates for dinner, or how you can forget for just a moment that they're gone and reach for the phone to call them. But then something happened that changed everything." Barbara's phone buzzed softly. Barbara heard it immediately. Her entire demeanor shifted. The careful composure faltered, replaced by anticipation mixed with anxiety. She glanced down, and for just a moment, her face lit up. The phone buzzed again. Again, Barbara's eyes darted to it, and again that same complicated expression crossed her face. Joy mixed with guilt, maybe, or fear. "Popular lady tonight," David said with a gentle smile, trying to keep the interview on track while acknowledging what was obviously a distraction. Barbara blushed like a teenager caught passing notes. "I'm so sorry," she said. Reaching for the phone with trembling hands, "I should turn it off." But as she picked up the device, it buzzed again. David watched as Barbara's face transformed completely. The careful widow's composure disappeared, replaced by something radiant and heartbreakingly hopeful. "You know what?" David said, his host instincts telling him that something important was happening here, something that might be more significant than the planned interview. "Who's texting you that's making you smile like that?" The question was gentle, curious rather than intrusive, but it hit Barbara like a physical force. Her hand went to her throat, touching the wedding ring on its chain, and suddenly she looked terrified, not of David's question, but of the answer she might give. She began, then stopped. The phone buzzed again, and despite herself she looked at it. Whatever she saw there made her eyes fill with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of someone overwhelmed by feeling wanted, needed, loved. "Barbara," David said softly, leaning forward in his chair, "what's going on?" The studio had grown quiet. The audience sensed that something was shifting, that they were witnessing a moment that hadn't been scripted or planned. Barbara looked at David, then at the audience, then back at her phone, and David could see her wrestling with something enormous, a secret she'd been carrying, a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to share. "I haven't told the women in my group about this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't told anyone." David waited. In 15 years of interviewing, he'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply create space for someone to speak their truth, to resist the urge to fill silence with questions or commentary. "There's a man," Barbara said, and saying it out loud seemed to release something she'd been holding back. "His name is Captain James Morrison. He's a doctor, a surgeon, stationed overseas with the Army. He's been writing to me." David felt something shift in his chest. There was something in Barbara's tone that made every instinct he'd developed start screaming warnings. "How did you meet him?" David asked carefully. "On a support website for military families," Barbara said, her voice growing stronger. "6 months ago, I was having a difficult night. I found this forum for families of service members. There was this post from a man who had lost his wife to cancer, and his words were so beautiful, so honest about the pain of losing someone you love." The phone buzzed again. Barbara looked at it and smiled through her tears. "I commented on his post," she continued, "just to say that I understood, and he wrote back. Not just a quick response, but this long, thoughtful message about how grief changes you." David was listening carefully, trying to assess what he was hearing. "And that was 6 months ago?" 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Cor," Barbara said with precision. "We've written to each other every day since then. He says I saved his life," she whispered. "After his wife died, he didn't think he could keep going. But then he found my messages, and he says I reminded him that love doesn't end just because someone dies." The audience was listening intently, some smiling at what sounded like a beautiful connection forged from shared grief. Others looked concerned, sensing something in the story that didn't feel quite right. David felt sick. He'd interviewed enough people, heard enough stories, to recognize the pattern that was emerging, but he also knew he had to be careful, had to let Barbara tell her story without jumping to conclusions that might devastate her if he was wrong, though every instinct told him he wasn't. "That sounds like it's been really meaningful for you," David said gently. "He understands things that other people don't," Barbara said, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "He knows what it's like to wake up and forget for a moment that your person is gone. He tells me I'm still beautiful, David. At 71, after 8 months of feeling invisible, someone tells me I'm beautiful." There was profound vulnerability in her voice. This wasn't just about companionship. This was about someone who had lost her sense of her own worth. "He says I have wisdom that comes from surviving real loss, Renmar," Barbara continued. "He says my letters help him be a better doctor. He says I'm not just beautiful, I'm necessary." The word hung in the air like a prayer. Necessary. For someone who had spent 8 months feeling surplus to requirements, the idea of being necessary was intoxicating. "When do you get to meet him in person?" David asked, though he was dreading the answer. "Next month," Barbara said, and her face lit up like Christmas morning. "His deployment ends in 3 weeks, and he's coming to see me. He says—" She paused, touching the wedding ring around her neck with trembling fingers. "He says he wants to marry me. He says we've wasted enough time being alone when we could be taking care of each other." David's heart was racing now. "Barbara, can I ask you something? And I want you to know I'm asking because I care about you?" Barbara nodded, though something in her expression suggested she knew what was coming and had been dreading this moment for weeks. "Has James ever asked you for money?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Barbara's face crumpled, not with surprise, but with the pain of having her deepest fear spoken out loud by someone whose opinion mattered to her. "His daughter needed emergency surgery," she said quietly, her voice losing its warmth. "In Germany, where he's stationed. The military insurance was delayed and she was going to die without immediate treatment. He didn't want to ask me, David, but I couldn't let a child die when I had the means to help." David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what was unfolding. "How much did you send him?" $12,000, Barbara whispered. "From Robert's life insurance. I wired it to a medical facility in Germany." The studio was so quiet David could hear the air conditioning humming. "And then what happened?" "The surgery went well," Barbara said, but her voice was hollow now. "But then there were complications, infection, additional procedures, and then his deployment pay got frozen and he couldn't afford his plane tickets to come see me. And then his mother had a stroke." She stopped, staring at her hands, which were now shaking visibly. "How much in total, Barbara?" David asked gently. $85,000, she said, the number falling like a stone into water. "Everything. Robert's life insurance, my retirement savings, the money from selling my jewelry, my engagement ring, my mother's pearls, everything we saved in 48 years of marriage." The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. David felt like he'd been punched in the chest. $85,000, a lifetime of careful saving, wiped out in 6 months of manufactured emergencies. "Barbara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when was the last time you actually talked to James on the phone?" "We've never talked on the phone," Barbara said quietly, the admission carrying the weight of something she'd never allowed herself to examine too closely. "He's always in surgery or in meetings when I call the number he gave me, but he sends me voice messages sometimes through the messaging app. His voice is so kind, David, so gentle. He has this slight southern accent that reminds me of my father." David was struggling to maintain his composure. "Have you video chatted with him?" "The internet connection where he's stationed is terrible," Barbara said. But she was crying now. And David could see that part of her, the part she'd been trying to silence for weeks, already knew what he was going to tell her. "We tried once, but it kept cutting out after just a few seconds. He sends me pictures, though. He's very handsome, distinguished. He looks like Robert did when we first met. Silver hair, kind eyes, the sort of face you trust immediately." Behind the scenes, David made a decision that would define this moment forever. He stood up from his desk and walked over to Barbara's chair. Without asking permission, without consulting producers, he knelt down beside her the way he might kneel beside his own mother if she needed comfort. "Barbara," he said gently, taking her hands in his, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. James Morrison isn't real." Barbara shook her head immediately, the gesture automatic and desperate. "No, David, I know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. I know him. I know his heart. He's not like those other men who prey on women. He loves me. He tells me so every day." "The photos he's sending you," David said softly, "they're stolen from someone else's social media accounts, probably from a real doctor or military officer whose pictures the scammers found online. The voice messages are likely edited from other sources or recorded by someone with a script. The emergencies, the complications, the delays, they're all carefully designed to keep you sending money while keeping him from having to meet you in person." Barbara was sobbing now, not just crying, but making the deep, aching sounds of someone whose heart was breaking in real time. "But he says he loves me," she whispered. "He says I'm beautiful. He says I matter. He says when he's scared or sad, thinking about me gets him through." David felt tears starting in his own eyes. "You do matter, Barbara. You are beautiful. but the person telling you that isn't who you think he is. Then who am I supposed to talk to at night when the loneliness feels like it's going to kill me? Barbara asked, her voice breaking on every word. Who's going to tell me good morning and good night? Who's going to care if I'm sad or scared or if I can't sleep because I miss Robert so much I can't breathe? Who's going to need me? The question hit David like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about fraud. This was about a woman so desperate for human connection, so afraid of being forgotten and discarded, that she'd willingly participated in her own financial destruction rather than face the alternative: complete emotional isolation. The women in your support group, David said gently, your neighbors, your children, people who actually know you and care about you. But they don't love me, Barbara said, and the distinction was crucial to her. Not the way James does. They care about me, they worry about me, but they don't need me. James needs me. When he's scared or lonely, he reaches out to me. I matter to him in a way I haven't mattered to anyone since Robert died. When James texts me, I feel alive again. David looked out at the audience, then back at Barbara. What happens next month when James doesn't show up? Barbara was quiet for a long moment, staring at the phone in her lap that had been both her lifeline and her destruction. I know he's probably not coming, she said finally. I've known for weeks, maybe months. But the alternative is going back to a world where no one says they love me, where I'm invisible, where I don't matter to anyone. And David, I don't know how to survive in that world. The studio fell into the kind of silence that follows a confession so raw, so honest, that it strips away all pretense and leaves only human truth. David stood up slowly and looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is one of the cruelest forms of theft that exists. It's not just stealing money, it's stealing hope, dignity, and the basic human need to feel loved and valued. He turned back to Barbara. But here's what I want you to know. You matter to everyone in this studio right now. You matter to people watching at home who see themselves in your story. Your love for Robert, your capacity to care for others, your willingness to help a stranger's sick child. Those things make you beautiful and valuable, not because someone tells you so, but because they're true. Barbara was looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and devastation. And Barbara, David said, you're going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you're going to be okay, because real love, the kind you had with Robert, the kind you're capable of giving and receiving, that doesn't disappear just because someone exploits it. As the show ended and the credits rolled, Barbara sat in the guest chair, still holding her phone. The text messages would keep coming for weeks. Declarations of love, new emergencies, new reasons why James couldn't come, but needed just a little more help. But for the first time in 6 months, Barbara wouldn't answer them, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop believing a beautiful lie and start rebuilding your life on painful truth. And sometimes that rebuilding begins with a stranger's kindness and the recognition that being alone doesn't have to mean being unloved. The fantasy was over. But Barbara Chen, widow, grandmother, survivor, was still very much real. And that, David knew, was where healing could finally begin.